Hi all, and welcome to another video on the Back to Basics, looking around the Palo Alto UI and seeing where we can find things and seeing how we can create things. And it's literally for people just new to it, or maybe a refresher or whatever. Certainly not in depth, just the basics and how we string things together. And of course now we're including SCM, Strata Cloud Manager, because that's becoming very, very popular, and I'm sure will become even more popular as time goes on. So we're going to start with SCM this time. We're going to start with SCM because we finished off with SCM last time and going to be as quick as we possibly can. So there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of parity with Panorama with regard to SCM and the way it's set out. And these are sort of, you could view these as device groups. So if you've worked with device groups before, you're talking about an inheritance model. And then these are just folders. And then we've got snippets of code as well, which we'll go into afterwards. Okay, there are two types of rules. So if I go onto my lab firewall, so that is my container group for these, and then if I put rules in there, then they will apply to both here and here, which is the firewall B, changed for reasons I don't want to go into. So effectively there are two types of rules within SCM, and we'll see how they look on the firewalls as well. So there are, when we're in the container group, we've got pre-rules and we've got post-rules. That's exactly the same as Panorama. So you have pre-rules and post-rules, which are evaluated in a top-down fashion. So any group you have, there's pre-rules shared, pre-rules group, then firewall rules, then post-rules group, post-rules shared. So it does follow itself. Just remember that pre and post are both on the same side, and you'll get it really. It's quite easy when you put it against the Panorama itself. So we have security rules. Security rules look exactly the same as they did before. So we've got a name for our security rule, which is our security rule. And then we can put a description in, and we can put a schedule in. And when we put a schedule in, a schedule is a lot easier on here, in my opinion. So we're going to schedule 1. We're going to schedule this. We can have it daily, weekly, or non-recurring, so a single one-off schedule. So if I wanted non-recurring, let's say I wanted this to start today and I wanted it to end tomorrow at the same time, I'd do that. And then this rule would basically be valid for that period of time. We can add tags to it. We can add sanction tag, or we can add whatever tags we want to help us with viewing stuff and so on. And then we have our match criteria here, which is set out pretty much the same way. So our zones, we can select our zones. Remember that on SCM with Prisma, they are mapped to two zones, but in here also we've got the zones for the firewalls. And then we select our zone here, which is literally the wrong way around, but it's say DMZ. There you go. Makes me look like I know what I'm doing. And then we've got the addresses as well. So any addresses, or we can select the addresses. And again, from here we can do the addresses. We can enter the addresses. We can create a new address group, external dynamic lists, or use regions. Can do that. And again, we've got the same thing for the destination there. Just let me get rid of this, if it will. There we go. And then we've got devices. So we've got any, select, no HIP or quarantine devices. Now this is a really good thing. No HIP is a really good thing because there's always an issue. There was previously with HIP checks. That's host information profile. So you can select devices, select a HIP check, and then basically you can write your rules based on the compliance of that laptop or that PC. And then of course we've got the devices that we go into, quarantine devices or select, and then we would select our devices there. Okay, so we're going to put any. Users is again as we saw in the firewalls, so we can select. So you can select your users or your user groups. Pre-log on, which is the tunnels, the machine tunnels. Known users, so any user who's known. Let's not check it. It just needs to be a known user or an unknown user. So a user with no user ID at all. Application is as before, so we select it there. And then we've got our applications, our application groups, and application filters. Application groups speaks for itself. Application filters are, we can create the filters based on risk, how it works, what it does, that type of thing. There's all sorts of, what categories it falls into, what functionality it has. And then we have application default, any or select. So if you use application default, then if you've got SSL, for instance, that'll only be allowed for on 443. So say you have an SSL VPN that's going through an 8443, because it's being picked up as SSL, that will be blocked because it won't go across this rule, because SSL and 8443 is not an application default, or you can select which ports you want. And then URL category and tenant restrictions, so you can select your URL category. What URL category does this go to? External dynamic lists and SaaS endpoints. And then tenant restrictions. So what tenant restrictions do you want to have? And then you can create your tenants, so you can make sure that your users can only go to certain tenants within SaaS apps or so on. The action is going to be the same as always, same as we always have. So we've got deny. Deny is deny and send back an ICMP. So send back a reset. So it's get a reset packet back. Anybody trying to enumerate the network or whatever will then see that there is an IP there that's replying at the very least. Allow is allow. Drop is drop silently, so nothing goes back. And then you've got reset client, so reset the initiator, reset server, reset the other side of the connection, or reset both. Or we can send an ICMP unreachable. So what we're going to do is we're going to do allow. Here's slightly different as well. So on the firewall, you'll see that you've got the option to use to set specific profiles or to set a group. Here they've just gone for profile group, and then you create that profile group within your other profiles, the security profiles, and then wrap that up into a group, and then you can see what the actual profiles themselves, which profiles make up that group. Log settings are, again, as we said before, so you've got log at session start, log at session end, got external log forwarding. If you want to create an external log forwarder, we can add that there. Log at session start is very good for if you're troubleshooting a connection that's not working and you want to see if it's actually hitting and what's happening to it when the connection is initially starting. But it's usually turned off as best practice for production traffic due to it creating a lot of logs. Okay, so that's the security policy. Now we do have another type of policy which the name escapes me. I think they were called web policies previously, but they've changed it to internet access rule. And internet access rule goes a lot further into being able to control applications and what applications can do. So we have, I'll just quickly go through it. So we have the name, description, again as always, allow or block is your only two options here, and then schedule again as well, and then log sessions enable. So source users, again, we can create this based on user, source user, destination address, any particular services, or negate is basically you put a value in there, and then if you click negate, then it's going to be anything except for that value. The web application, so the web applications here, this is it's really good actually. So we've got web applications. If we put YouTube, if we spell it correctly, it works a lot better. And then we select that. Okay, so now we've got YouTube within our applications, and then we can click into YouTube, and you can see that you can control here very quickly the live chat posting, live chat viewing, and so on, and including header insertions. What header insertions do you want? Enforce safe search. So if you want to enforce a safe search on that, then it'll add that header to it. I forget what the header is now. And then your file control profile as well. So if your file, if you're uploading or downloading, you've got a potential DLP issue, and then you can control that. Okay, again, we've got the URL categories. So we have URL categories, all the standard URL categories that we've seen before, external dynamic lists and SaaS endpoints. And then we have the advanced. So if we wanted to go to, say, AI Code Assistant, then we have advanced controls we can put on that. So additional action, somebody goes to this, do we want it to be no additional action, which is actually spelled incorrectly, which is odd. No additional action, continue, they get a continue page, it's basically a user education piece. Redirect, as in the redirect to somewhere else, or isolate, and then you've got browser isolation, and then you can enable or disable decryption for that as well. And then you've got the file control profile again there. Now, the thing about these is, so we'll just go on to these. So we've got file control profile here, which is the one we're going to be using. So you can create your own, or you can use the ones that are there, and you configure for each download and upload. So at that point, then it changes to that. So you've got upload, which file control profile we're going to use for upload and which we're going to use for download. And then that will control uploads and downloads. And advanced security inspection settings is command and control protection, vulnerability protection, and wildfire and malware protection analysis. Okay, now how that looks on the firewall, if I just show you a, let me see, if I've got, right, so I go to YouTube Allow. Now, because in YouTube Allow, what I've done here is I have only enabled the streaming service. When that gets to the firewall, when we're managing NGFWs from SCM, it looks slightly differently, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so now on the firewall, we can see that firstly it appends, there's an underscore, and then it alters the name for NGFW shared. We don't have any tags on it, so that's all good, but we can see that we've got destination internet from any. But because I'm now controlling the aspects of it, what it's done is it's written the rule specifically to deny the ones that we didn't want enabled, and then it's created the rule using everything that we need to allow the communication we want, which was the YouTube streaming. So we've got YouTube base, we've got YouTube as a container app, YouTube base, and YouTube streaming. But the live chat posts and everything is all set in a deny rule above it. So although it looks like a single rule on SCM, it then comes down effectively as two rules, because you've now got two rules to control that traffic, which is initially might look like, okay, that's a bad thing, but actually it's not. It genuinely isn't. It's making that connectivity as secure as possible. So as long as you now don't have loads of stuff that just wanders off down the bottom and allows any access at all, which I'm absolutely convinced there will be stuff on here that does, because it's a lab. But because you don't have that, then that means that traffic, that application is absolutely secured. Okay, so that's looking at it from an SCM point of view. We'll just quickly run through again the URL filtering and so on. Again, as I say, this is really quick because I've been known to waffle on. We're already on 12 minutes, and I'm trying to get these under 20. So we've got the security policies, the anti-spy, and the vulnerability protection is all there. Where we had the profile group, so URL access management is everything that you'd expect to see. It's the profiles. We've got the different settings. So you've got the general settings. So all the stuff that you'd see under device settings normally on a firewall, you've got there. You've got the third-party remote browser isolation settings, and here's where you configure all your response pages and so on, and your admin overrides. The rest of it there, file blocking, URL access management, and so on. And decryption all speaks for itself. Decryption policies, SSL decryption, DOS protection is your DOS protection. Profile groups, again, as we said before, as opposed to being able to add just profiles to a rule, you've now got to add them to a group and then add the group to it. But then that group can have, so you can have blank sections in that group. So it's basically the same thing, only now you've got a group construction as opposed to simply adding separate profiles. Okay, so on a firewall now, we do have the security rules, we have the NAT rules. Remember, NAT is applied afterwards. So when you're creating inbound rules, for instance, it's pre-NAT IP, post-NAT zone, because as it hits that zone, then it's gonna get NATed at that point. A thing to remember about Palo firewalls is that whole post-NAT thing, because it can cause a confusion when you're looking at the NAT rules. A tip to pick up here is if you're doing anything that's going outside, I would always expressly configure your zones in the NAT rules. So where we're creating a NAT rule, try and avoid any as a source zone, because anything that's going to come in will potentially get, and your reply that's going out will get natted by it, and you end up with a land attack. Again, a bit more sort of in depth, not really going to go into it, but that's just, I would always define your zones, your actual zones that you want to see this going to. And these are constructed really simply. So we have the general there, which is the name, the description, the tags for the rule. You can group the rules by tag if you want. The NAT type, IPv4, NAT64, NAT v6. Audit comments, which can be forced, so that people have to put an audit comment in to be able to create a rule. And then we have the source zone that we come into, destination zone, where's our traffic going to? Is that tied to an interface? I would always tie it to an interface if you can. But potentially, if you've got multiple interfaces in a single zone that could potentially be an egress point for that traffic, you could have any, and it's just as it's going to that zone, and whichever one it picks by the routing table. And then the service. So what service is your original packet going to? So if your original packet's going to 443, but you need to NAT it or whatever, then you can NAT that to something else afterwards. And then your source address and your destination address. So is this specific NAT? So, and the way to look at that is literally how your original packet will look. So where am I coming from? What is my source address? What's my destination address? And what's my service I'm going to? And translated packet is dynamic IP import, persistent dynamic IP import, dynamic IP, and static IP. So do you want to go dynamic IP import, which is the standard hide NAT? Persistent dynamic IP import, which is it. Make sure it uses that same IP import mapping. Dynamic IP is just dynamic IP, retains port mappings, and static IP is static IP. And then we come back the other way. So we've got static IP, and then we can have translated address, put the address in there, translated port, and what port we're going to translate it to. Security rules. Okay, so we're going to create a security rule. Again, we've got our name, the rule type universal. So universal is if you have multiple mixed zones in both source and destination, then that will cover all of those zones. All of those zones will be able to go to each other. If it's an intrazone rule, then it removes the destination zone, because that can only have one zone in a rule because it's intrazone, so it's that zone to that zone. And then interzone is the exact opposite of that. The traffic will only work for zone to zone. It has to be going to a different zone. Tags again, and group rules by tag. And then for our source, we've got our source zone, where we're coming from, our source address, our source user, if any, and then we've got the same options again. We've got prelog, unknown user, unknown, or select a user. And then we've got source device. So we've got no HIP. Oh, we've got no HIP in this one because this is version 11.1, I think it is. Quarantine or select or any. So we can select, and then we can select our HIP profiles that we have based on the compliance nature of the device that we want to allow on this rule. Destination zone. So if I went back, so I've selected, so because I've selected intrazone as the policy rule type, it's now grayed out because there's no point. So if I just create that as universal, or conversely I could do it as interzone, that would still give us that option. And we can select, or we've got the multicast option as well. Destination address as well. We can put the destination address where we're going to. So where's this rule being allowing the traffic to? And again, we've got the negate as well. So a use case for that might be if you want to allow a host to only internet sort of addresses, you could put RFC 1918 addresses in there and just do a negate, and then that would say, okay, you can get to publicly routable addresses, but you can't get to any private RFC 1918 addresses. And then destination device again that we have there. So what can you get to? What device can you get to? The applications are applications any, or you can create application filter or application group, or you can indeed use an application filter or an application group for the rule. And then what it depends on. So when you put an application in there, it will be what does it depend on. So if we were to do, I always pick on YouTube. I don't know why. I mean, it's missed it anyway because I screwed it up. But 1C Enterprise, don't know what that is, but it depends on MSDS SMB base. Okay, so then you can add that to the rule, add it to the current rule, or you can add to an existing rule. So you can add it to a different firewall rule. But then that would mean that aspects of your traffic would be traversing to rules potentially, well, most likely. Then the service and URL category. So we have application default, any, and select as we had before. So our applications, whatever the application database says, it's the default ports for that application. And then we have the URL category. So this is literally working as this is to be separated from URL filtering. You won't get any response pages from this or anything like that. But if you put in there that you You want to allow only auctions. If this is an auction rule, I don't know why you'd have an auction rule. So if you put auction rule in there, then that is going to control that as a destination. So this user will only be able to go to that destination, or this source address will only be able to go to that URL category of sites. I'm not a massive fan of it. It does work. Lots of people use it. Don't know why I'm not a massive fan of it. It works. But you don't get any response pages from it, so you won't see a block page or anything like that. So in actions, we've got our actions there: deny, allow, drop, reset client, and then send ICMP unreachable. Log session start and session end is exactly the same as you saw before, and then the log forwarding. So a log forwarding profile, again, if you have a log forwarding profile named default, it will add it here. As also, if you have a profile group called default, it will add it here as well. So we can select our groups. There's no groups at the moment, but you can create them separately from here, or we can do profiles. So now we've got profiles. Now we can select our separate profiles from here, and there'll be defaults and there'll be strict and so on vulnerabilities. Most of them have got something configured already in them. For the schedule, we've got the schedule again, like we saw before. We can create a schedule, and we can create that non-recurring, weekly or daily. And again, that gives the rule a lifetime, or it's only available daily for a certain period of time. And then we've got the quas marking, which is to mark the quas afterwards. And quas is a huge subject, so not going to that now. But basically, that's going to change the IPD, the differentiated services code protocol, I think that's called, code point, and then the IP precedence. And that's going to, so other upstream devices are going to be able to look at that, and they're going to decide whether or not that traffic should be prioritized based on their quas policies and so on. So that's a security rule, policy-based forwarding. Policy-based forwarding, or as it's sort of known in SCM world, is for Prisma anyways, is traffic steering, sort of. So this is basically evaluated before the routing table is looked up. So when you have a packet arrive, the first routing lookup a firewall is going to do is it's going to check the PBF rules, because that supersedes the routing table. Very useful in redundant ISP setups and so on. So well worth sort of looking at. Can be a little bit finicky. So we've got a name for it. We've got source. Where's our traffic coming from? Where do we expect traffic coming from? Is it a zone or an interface? And then what zone or interface it is. What source address, any source users or so on. Where's it going to? The applications. What application? Be careful with applications, because it can sometimes, it does take about 7 or 8 packets to identify an application. So your initial traffic may not go the way you want it to. It can lead to asymmetric routing. And then service. So what services are going to go on, which is usually a lot better, because that is part of the 6-tuple evaluation, the source, destination, ports, and so on, and is a lot easier for the firewall to see. And then forwarding. Are we going to forward it, discard it, no PBF? The egress interface, where's it going to? The next hop, okay, what's the next hop for this? And then are we going to monitor it? Are we going to pull this rule? Are we going to disable this rule if that next hop is unavailable, or if the monitor IP is unavailable? And then enforcing symmetric return when it's coming inbound. Again, policy-based forwarding is a little bit more sort of complicated, but a simple basic one would be you've got 2 ISPs and you want to send certain amount of traffic out of one, certain amount of traffic out of the other. Just do a simple PBF rule and just point it that way. And then your decryption policies. Really quickly, say these just add decryption or no decrypt. So you got a name for it again, the source zone, source address, source user, and source device. Again, we can always define exactly what it is we want to apply this rule to. Destination, where's it going? Destination address, destination devices. And the service URL category, what are we going to decrypt or not decrypt? And then we've got the action here. So if you've got no decrypt and you've got a decryption profile associated to this, you are going to have that evaluated against it. So for instance, if you've got a no decrypt, but you put a profile on that says that you want to block untrusted issuers, any no decrypt traffic that's got an untrusted issuer that's being presented to the firewall will still be blocked. There are certain categories that you need to not decrypt. So most places, financial, health information, anything that's really personally identifiable, anything that's got any real personal information or sensitive information, you wouldn't decrypt. And then you have the decrypt. So the type is going to be a self-forward proxy, SSH proxy, or inbound. And then you have the decrypt. So again, what type are we going to do? What profile are we going to use? And then once we've got that profile, you can set up your decryption there. It's not mandatory, a decryption profile. Log successful SSL handshake. You'll have a lot of logs because most will be successful with any luck, as long as you're working. It's all worked out for you. And then log unsuccessful is probably good for troubleshooting. So that's really it. That's the policies. There's only one more thing to look at on a panorama that I'll show you now. Okay, so on panorama, when we're creating rules, so we've got that concept of pre-rules and post-rules and default rules, but also we've got this thing of a target. So we've created all our rules, so this is in shared. So everything underneath that would basically inherit this policy. However, we might not want that to be the case. So we've got this option here for target. So what we're going to do is going to go into the rule, block quick, and then everything else is the same. We've got source, destination, application, service, and URL, and then the actions that we're going to take on it. And then we get to target. And target means that I can say, I only want to send this rule to those firewalls. Then we've got a usage. So we can do some analysis on the policy then. But if I do that, it's not allowed on here, but if I do that, then here would show the Chicago firewalls, for instance, and then any other firewall that's in shared, which is of course all firewalls that are connected to the panorama, they wouldn't get that rule. And if they already had that rule would then be removed from their rule base on the next push, and it'd only be pushed down to Chicago. It's a very good idea. It can increase commit times because basically Panorama has to work out then what firewalls need that rule, what don't, and then it has to evaluate it's depending on your settings for shared objects. It then has to evaluate what objects it's going to send down to the firewall. The only other rule to look at, the only other type of rule to look at, which is really sort of something you might come up against, is the authentication rules. So when a user or a system requests a resource or it starts a session, it's going to hit the authentication policy rule first. It's going to hit, does this traffic match a request for authentication, for secondary authentication? So we put default browser challenge, pass through your browser, that makes sense. Default no captive portal, or default web form. Okay, so then you can enforce on certain traffic the need to authenticate again. So for very sensitive traffic, you can enforce that. And again, you've got the targets because when you're in Panorama, you've got the targets. So if we wanted to do a browser challenge, that means you're going to do another browser challenge when you go to here, and then the security policies and everything then evaluated to apply the security to that particular traffic flow. Okay, hope that's been good. That's building policies and policy evaluation, how it works, and please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.